of the Tydfil County Borough Council's Governance and Audit Committee. I'm sitting here in the chair as the chair for last year, but item 1 on the agenda is the appointment of chair. I look around the room for any nominations for chair. So, so currently in the room there are 2 lay members, myself and Colin. We've had a discussion previously, not just to short circuit the process, and Mr. Foster is more than happy for me to continue. Do we therefore need to do a vote? Excellent. So the next item on the agenda is the appointment of a vice chair. This can come from anybody in the both the lay members and councillor members. And I look around. It's a reasonably low-tech role. I'm seeking. Are you content to stand, sir? Should we do a show? Just to be clear, show of hands. Okay, excellent. That is also unanimous. Thank you very much. Item 3 is apologies for absence, and given the slim pickings of committee members here today, I'm sure there are some. I've been made aware of Councillor Claire Jones and lay member Sue Erickson. I presume there are several others. Yes, Chair, we have. Okay, Declan House. Okay. And just to check that. So we have 4 to 12, but we are covered. Excellent. Okay, thanks. No, a quarter of 4 is 3. That's right. Yeah, yeah. It's okay. Yeah, we can. Yeah. No, that you're not going anywhere. No. Okay, just checking. Okay, thank you very much. Item 4 on the agenda is declarations of interest, and I turn to Councillor Andrew Barry.
Yes, Chair. I'll be presenting the reports on quarterly update for the risk register Q4 and the annual risk management progress and corporate risk register. And there's mention within that of home to school transport. It's only in passing that I mention it. If there's a debate, I won't take part in it.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Item 5 on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting, the meeting which was held on the 24th of April. I won't go through them page by page. If anyone has any issues they wish to raise, then please say so. Okay, that's positive. They're short and to the point. Just to check, the agenda item says the minutes are for information, but if I look at the minutes of the last meeting, it says it was resolved that the minutes of the Governance Audit Committee were accepted as an accurate record. So are we accepting them, receiving them, or are we simply receiving them? Is it just for information? It's just for information. Okay, thank you. We will do that, and we will turn now to item 6 associated with that, which is the action log. And there's a few items on here which are not marked as complete, but I think today's business will hopefully cover off a few of these. Starting with number 1 on the action log. I'm on page 9 of the bundle for those people trying to keep track. And the first item was risk workshops, informal training for members. And the last status was this is to be addressed once the head of policy performance returns to work. I don't know if anyone has an update on that position. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, if I could raise them. We have had the return to just work from the, and I think he's the former policy officer as it just currently stands. So we're still working through as to who will be responsible for that role in going forward. So we haven't made a decision at this point in time.
Okay, thanks for that. Hopefully that'll crystallise in the not too distant future. And if you want to liaise with me offline if necessary, we can try and move that forward. Thank you. Item 2 is marked as complete. Item 3, that's on the agenda for today, and I welcome the 3 officers sitting directly in front of me. I can see the backs of their heads, which is never a great view. Thank you all. Item 4 is the corporate risk register, and there's a little note in here which says that a column to be added which highlights the cabinet / scrutiny committee who owns the risk, and I noticed that isn't on there as of today. So perhaps Matt, you're on the call. I think if you could just make a note that needs to happen next time around when that gets presented to us. Thank you.
Certainly, Chair.
Okay, thanks a lot. So we'll mark that as to be done for our next meeting, which I think is September. Next couple are marked as complete. We'll roll down to item 8, which is the Audit Wales letters, the 3-year timetable. That has indeed been circulated to members of the committee. And item 9 is, I was just checking with the internal audit charter whether any discrepancies between the 4 governance audit committees which received the audit charter from for the regional audit service. I wonder, Andy, if you can give us a quick update.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this information has been circulated to all members prior to the meeting. We've got 4 organisations for governance and audit committees that the Regional Internal Audit Service serves. And one of the questions raised by one of the governance and audit committees was what were the comments from the other 3 governance and audit committees. So the summary outlines it, no contentious issues. There's a bit of housekeeping. There's reference to lay members, which will be incorporated in the 23-24 review of the Internal Audit Charter. There was a question around my access rights to senior officers within organisations, and I have direct access to the chief exec and the leader if I so wish. Doesn't happen very often, but there's a route there for me to take if there is a need. And there was a comment about version control of the Internal Audit Charter. So the Internal Audit Charter is updated and reviewed on an annual basis, and that will be reported into each of the 4 governance audit committees every year. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. That's the action log. Any issues anyone else wants to raise on the action log? Okay, thank you very much. Now turn to the first substantive item today, agenda item 7, which members will recall were connected to a limited assurance internal audit report on temporary housing solutions, and we've invited some officers to attend today, and we are blessed with 3 of the team today: Suzanne Stevens, Suzanne Lewis Abbott, and Alan. Oh, your name's at the bottom of the paper. Sorry, Alan. Alan Owen. How can I forget that? Thank you all. We've got your paper, but if you want to give us some brief headlines you want to talk about, or who's going to be leading? Okay, go ahead, so Suzanne Stevens.
Okay, thank you. So as you'll all be aware from the final audit report that was circulated in December, there were 6 recommendations made as part of the report. 4 medium and 2 high risk. So the first one, which you'll find in Appendix A, refers to 1.1, where there were 10 cases sampled, one of which was found to be without a risk assessment. We're confident that this was just a human error due to the high workload of staff at that point in time and continually. So those records have been updated. Staff have been retrained just as a matter of course, and obviously we'll continue to do that for any new staff that may join the team. But as I said, it was just an oversight rather than an area of training that was identified. You will note that there is one recommendation missing out of Appendix A, so I do apologise for that, and that is just purely because it was copied and pasted from a separate document. because the report was a PDF and it was emitted on that document. So just for reference, that refers to 1.2, where it was identified that due to changes in the legislation that came about during COVID, that our allocations policy and our easy read guide hadn't been updated. Obviously, the legislation that applied during COVID, for the moment, no longer applies. However, we are in the process of reviewing the Common Housing Register allocations policy as we speak, and that should be completed in about 3 months' time. So we are consulting with our RSLs at the moment on that. The third recommendation then refers to the visual checks undertaken on our temporary accommodation, including B&Bs. Whilst those checks were happening during the period of the audit, they weren't actually being recorded on our Civica system. So unfortunately, our Civica system doesn't have, the system doesn't allow them to be recorded on it. So formally, we have documented those inspections and they are available to view on the council's O drive. And again, we continue to visually inspect the B&Bs on a fortnightly basis. That said, we do know that it doesn't meet the Suitability of Accommodation Act, as is the case in many other local authorities. So that's not unique to Merthyr. But as I said, we're doing the best we can to ensure that there are adequate facilities where possible. The fourth recommendation then referred to, again, it was more of a technical and admin error where some of the temporary accommodation placements hadn't been updated on our Civica system. This was down to the fact that for some of the data we need to report to Welsh Government, we can't record that and extract the reports on Civica. So we're also recording this data on a separate Excel spreadsheet. And again, just due to staff capacity and oversight, some of the records on Civica hadn't been updated. But, we can offer assurances that the correct information was available on another system. But again, the Housing Solutions Officer is doing, or the team leader, sorry, is doing regular checks as part of her own audit on the staff to ensure that those records are being kept up to date. Referring to 2.2 then, again, that's a similar scenario where it was just administration found to be incomplete. Again, we've updated those records, continue to do refresher training with staff, and again, we're just monitoring to ensure that that system is kept up to date. Finally, then, in terms of the last recommendation, 3.1, which I suppose is probably the most significant, and as I referenced earlier, is just down to the fact of the unsuitability of accommodation in temporary accommodation. As I said, we know we're not meeting our statutory duty in some cases. However, we have met a lot of barriers up to now in terms of expanding maybe our HMOs and supported accommodation for a variety of reasons. Based on that, we did take a report to full council in April, suggesting that we do progress with our HMO model, and again look for suitable either land or other premises for supported accommodation that we can reconfigure. Fortunately, that was passed by the majority, so we're now working with our private landlord, D2 Propco, to source an additional 2 HMOs for the time being. So we've secured 2 2-bedroom units, which should be on board in the next couple of weeks. We've looked at 2 beds initially because they'll serve that dual purpose, because they won't need to go through the planning process. One is going to save us time in getting them up and running, and also we can utilise them for families because they wouldn't have to go through the HMO process because they wouldn't be eligible. We're also looking at alternative sources in terms of other supported accommodation. So there is one particular site that we're looking at the moment, again, which might provide between 8 and 10 units of supported accommodation for potentially those with complex needs. Again, we're working with our estates department and our RSL partners to identify other sites and premises. So this is work in progress. So, we know that we're not going to find answers for this overnight, given the challenges we still face, because the numbers that we've got coming through B&B at the moment are still significantly high. And unfortunately, as we rehousing one, another one walks through the door, probably another 5 walk through the door. So the figures have been quite stagnant over the last 3 years, really. And we also know from speaking to Welsh Government that the emergency provisions that they put in place for COVID, that through wider legislative reform that will happen within this Senedd term, that they are looking to bring in that flexibility within the legislation and that all-in approach as a permanent measure, which obviously will place further pressures on all local authorities. And the position we find ourselves in isn't just unique to Merthyr, as I said earlier. I know probably the majority, if not all, local authorities are really struggling at the moment in sourcing adequate temporary accommodation. So I don't know if anyone's got any questions back of that.
If I can, if I can
Alex,
just,
yeah.
if I can just add, Chair, just to confirm, the pressure on the housing solutions team, which we've seen since the pandemic, is really unprecedented. The nature and complexity of the problems that we're dealing with intensifies on a monthly basis. So the old, tried and tested route to social accommodation doesn't it's not valid anymore. We've worked hard this calendar year to raise the profile both internally across departments and also with members of the nature of the problem. Prior to going to council in April, we had an all members workshop, which gave us an opportunity to have a frank and open discussion. I think we got a very, very talented and committed housing solutions team, which during COVID we put more resources in and restructured. So although it's a challenge, I think a response has been appropriate, but obviously the scale of the problem means that we'll be battling with it for some time.
I absolutely don't underestimate the scale of the problem, and I fully recognise it isn't something that's unique to Merthyr Tydfil. Just to help us understand the scale, before I go over to Councillor Salmon and Councillor Tovey, just to help us understand the scale of the issue, I was looking back at the internal audit report. I couldn't see it there, but it was a very quick read through. What's the current scale of the need, the demands for housing units versus the current scale of our availability? In other words, what's the gap? Because there's a lot of interesting numbers in here about how we're trying to close the gap. But what I couldn't quite see is, if we get all this done, will that fix the problem as it stands today? But I understand that there's new demand all the time. But if that would be helpful, if we can get some sort of context.
Okay, so as I said, the numbers are really stagnant in B&Bs. So we usually have between, I would say, about 95 to 115 in B&B at any one time. In terms of supported accommodation, you're probably looking at about another, say, 50. So in total, we're probably looking at about 170 at this point in time that need permanent accommodation. But that said, that doesn't include the families that are still starting to come through with the cost of living crisis now. Whereas, during the COVID period, there was a ban on evictions because that's been lifted. And as I said, the cost of living, we are starting to see those filter through, which are a lot more difficult to source temporary accommodation for because of the provisions we've currently got, unfortunately. So I think Appendix B then does show that the developments that we've got in the pipeline coming through. But again, due to circumstances beyond our control, there has been delay on some in terms of, increased building costs. We've had to find more funding. Some building companies have gone into administration, so that's put further delays. So there's many things that have been outside our control, unfortunately. But the difficulty is, as I said earlier, as we start to rehouse some, quite slowly, more coming through. So, for example, in the last 2 working days, we probably had another 10 new cases come through. So, the demand is far outweighing the supply at the moment.
Suzanne, that's very helpful to give us some context. I'll turn over to Councillor Salmon.
Well, thank you, Chair. Just coming in on your question there and what Suzanne has said, I don't think that gives the full picture, to be honest, because I was able to get from a member of the housing team, who are absolutely fantastic. That was supposed to be my first make a comment. The actual need for a one bedroom properties, and I think this was in February, was 1,215, and of those 164 were in band 1, and then 2-bedroom property need was 614 properties were needed, and 59 were in band 1. So there is a massive need. So and I'm wondering, my second question was, if we could have that little chart, you know, sent to this committee or the or members every month, you know, just to keep this updated, it would be great, because then that will tie in with my next, what I was going to say about HMOs. When this came to council, I actually voted against it because of some issues we had previously. I have been able to go to Plymouth Street to see your property down there, which is absolutely fantastic. And if your HMOs coming through, if they're like that and in those kind of position, situated in that sort of an area, I think they will work well. Obviously, there's going to be residents where these properties are going to go. Residents are going to be anxious, to be honest, but I'm wondering if there's rules set out. And I've seen the rules in the house, and I've also seen the rules that Hayley has, her own personal rules for these properties. I'm wondering that if you look at a street, if you could send those rules to, you know, maybe the properties in that area, just to keep, just to show people, you know, how stringent, how strict you are, and you don't put up with any antisocial behaviour. And I think that will go a long way to appeasing residents as well. I think that's it for a second. I'll let Clive come in.
Thanks, Declan. Clive, before we bring in, Declan, you've suggested there is a regular update brought to this committee. I'm fully supportive of that. I guess we can just note that as an action. Just keep it as a standing item, perhaps on this agenda. So rather than monthly, that'll be 6 weekly or something, I guess, or whatever works with your appropriate timeline, Suzanne. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Now, what I was wondering is the length of time is taken to get these properties on the market. I know it's not your responsibility, but for instance, where I live in Kevin Coy, they've got Leasevine, and there's 10 units there, and they estimate it'll be ready in a year's time. Well, the building's actually there. You know, if I owned that building, I'm sure I could get that work done in 3 months and probably half the price of what it costs the housing associate. You know, why does it take a year? And then the other one in Kevin Coyd is Kevin Isaf. They moved all the residents out now. It must have been over a year ago, and they estimate it'll be 2 years before they create 50 units. So all these people were moved out, creating housing problems. They were taking up houses that our homeless could have moved. And it's just been empty for a year with nothing being done, you know. Why does it take so long, you know? Thanks.
Yeah, I think we could probably do another session on that in terms of development. So the registered social landlords work really closely with us,
Yeah.
particularly around the development programme that we have and the social housing grant programme that we run within Merthyr. I suppose the challenges for a social landlord start from even identifying suitable land. Once we've got the land or sites like Leasevine and Kevin Isaf, sometimes working with an existing building is harder because of the constraints that poses, and also the expectation on the RSL to deliver the new properties within certain standards. So not only do they have to be certain space standards, but certain environmental standards. In the development of that, it needs quite considerable consultation with the planning department and sustainable drainage solutions, which again is things that are outside of the control in terms of timelines. So we need to go through those processes. Then it's a matter of procurement, getting adequate builders. Now getting trades across the sector has proved extremely challenging at the moment. And when we have had tenders back, the tenders have been in excess of what the budget levels and the viability of the grants are. So again, it's a value engineering exercise. It's back to Welsh Government in terms of how we can make the sites work. And they do work closely with us, but you know, the RSLs often take a lot of the financial risk. and often are developing the plots of land at a loss before they've started. So it is quite a complex environment and quite a complex sort of framework in terms of how they work. And despite all of that, they do keep coming to the table with further developments, and we're on track to spend the full 6.2 million allocated to us this year. So I can fully appreciate, you know, if you're looking at a site, you know, you don't see anything happening, or you don't see progress in terms of the timeline we would expect. But it is usually because of the barriers that are in place for the RSLs. So happy to share some more information on that outside of this, if it would be useful as well.
Oh, thanks.
I've got two more hands up, Colin Prosser, then Councillor Salmon. So I'll bring Colin, you go first.
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the Civica system, because obviously with the data you pointed at that as being sort of one of the difficulties, whereas my understanding is that system is there so to support your work, and you know that's your IT backup. And I just think that, you know, are you not going to have further problems if you back onto things like Excel spreadsheets and things like that in order to you know, to inform your work?
Yeah, there is some work being done, pan Wales with those that use the Civica system, because I know Welsh Government are looking to revise the H12 reporting system. So we're hoping that some changes can be made in the near future, and maybe funded collectively, because the costs for changing Civica are absolutely astronomical at the moment. So it would be a significant cost to the local authority if we just made those changes to the system, you know, independently. Because when the Civica systems were set up, they're quite bespoke. So whilst other local authorities use them, they're not all set up in exactly the same way. But because additional data, in addition to the H12, is required at the moment by Welsh Government for those in temporary accommodation, we just can't extract the data the way it's currently set up, unfortunately. But it's something we're looking into, because obviously it's not ideal to be running the two systems side by side.
No. And the other thing I was going to ask was about D2 Propco, is that how you say? Whether they're an efficient partner to be working with, because I know there's always some history I've missed out on with the rejection of the 30 properties, was it, that you'd proposed? You know, whether there was some conflict there with the executive and the council, or you know, why those properties were rejected.
Yeah, that particular company, we've already got two HMOs with them, and we've worked with them since 2018. And Duncan Evans, who's the main manager there, works with a lot of local authorities throughout South Wales. So, you know, he does deliver an excellent service on the two HMOs that we currently use. I suppose the main reason for those rejected properties was that we were working with elected members and obviously wanted the support of them and the community in trying to identify the best and most suitable location. Unfortunately, you know, there still is that stigma around homelessness, and there is that public perception that if someone is homeless, that they've got a drug problem, alcohol problem, you know, that they're a criminal. Unfortunately, you know, we're trying to break down those barriers, but because of some of the properties we'd identified going back maybe 18 months ago, it got to the point where the public were submitting petitions. Corporately, we just decided that at that time, you know, we weren't going to pursue it for those particular pressures. But unfortunately, there were few other options available, hence why we had to take it back to council in April. As it was like last chance saloon, really. It was that or report ourselves to Welsh Government.
Oh, thanks. You answered my third question as well. Thanks.
Thank you, and congratulations on the clairvoyancy as well. Councillor Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. Suzanne, you mentioned that numbers are fairly static and they haven't really changed, say, over the 12 months, I suppose, whatever. Is this still down to landlords wanting to sell their properties, or is there other specific reasons why people keep coming through?
Well, I suppose it's anecdotal information, but we think certainly the implementation of the Renting Homes Act has had a massive impact. You know, I know of landlords personally that have left the market because the changes made in that act were certainly on the side of the tenant, and it does make it more difficult now for a landlord to gain possession. So, you know, I think that's contributed massively. Obviously, the market rents at the moment privately are through the roof. Generally, our type of client who are on housing benefit just can't afford them. So there's a variety of factors, but I think, you know, the greater flexibility in the all-in approach, whilst obviously it has its advantages and we're all working, if, you know, for the same objective, nobody wants to see anyone, you know, out on the street. Inevitably, there will be unintended consequences to that, where people will try and manipulate the system, because then they'll over time will see that is the only way to get accommodation. And I suppose the difficulty is we don't make a charge for temporary accommodation. So, you know, you may get sort of older adults then living at home. So if they can go down the housing route and go into temporary accommodation and pay nothing, as opposed to staying at home, possibly if the family on benefits, there'd be a non-dependent charge. They might have to pay mum and dad for food. So I think inevitably you will get that little bit of collusion, which obviously from our perspective is very difficult to prove, to avoid any legal challenge, really. So it's a variety of factors, but and obviously the cost of living in terms of families now that you know, we get a lot of notices coming through where there is no fault eviction. Some are actually paying the rent. As I said, it's just the landlords wanting to leave the market. So it's a combination of things.
Okay. One more question, and I finish then. It's probably not for this, and probably something you can't answer. It's maybe this may be for planning or environmental health, or maybe Alan might know. Because these two properties, they've got the cameras there, so any issues, you know, they showed on the cameras, they've got all these rules in place, but that's not set in law. So anyone can come in, have a 2-bedroom HMO. You don't have to go through the planning process, and it might not be run as you could have. You could have rogue landlords come in, and you could have they might come in and vulnerable people go into these properties. I'm just wondering, is this something, these rules that we can put in place onto all HMOs within the borough? No.
No,
Right.
that's not possible. Just to add what Suzanne said about the private rented sector, currently our problems could be exacerbated further because Welsh Government are now out to consultation about regulation of the of rental in the private sector. So that might compound with the Rented Homes Act to see a further loss of landlords locally.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Chair. Thank you all.
Thanks for those conversations. Just a couple more for me before we move on. Firstly, I think you said it when you were talking, Suzanne, but it's in 4.2 of the paper. You said there's been lots of legislative changes, some as a result of COVID and otherwise. And you said some of these have had unintended consequences. I wonder if you can just spell out a little bit what they are, and if these are Welsh Government regulations and there have been these unintended consequences, is there any likelihood that some of these new legislation pieces of work gets revoked in some way and amended in some way to fix some of the problems that have been spotted?
Okay, so some of the unintended consequences are what I've just referred to with Councillor Salmon's question in terms of the Rent and Homes Act and landlords leaving the market. In terms of the suitability of accommodation order, which was going to be amended to say that local authorities couldn't use B&Bs at all unless there was a public health emergency. It was only last week they did announce, not in writing, but in a meeting we attended, that they are now going to delay that further, and it will form part of the wider reform that they're looking at the moment that will be completed by the end of the Senate term. I think that's obviously to do with the fact that they think, you know, and we know that what they're asking is unreasonable at this point in time because we've got so many in B&B, as have other local authorities, that it just wouldn't be achievable within the short term that they originally wanted, which was 31st of March this year. So those are the main unintended consequences.
Okay, and it sounds like some of them be recognised by
Yeah.
some of those delays. And just finally for me, before I bring in Councillor Barry, We are, I think we noted when the audit report came to us that we are failing in the sustainability of accommodation order alongside most other local authorities in Wales. What's the consequences of that? Is this kind of so what question? I mean, of course, the consequences for homeless people who need temporary accommodation, but is the council under any sanction from Welsh Government for failing to meet this?
No, the council isn't under any sanction. Technically, we're not meeting our started responsibility, but no local authorities are
Okay.
in Wales. Plus, we've discussed homelessness here, but you can't look at this temporary accommodation issue without the Ukrainian program, the resettlement program for Ukrainians, and also the migration partnership dispersal, with thousands and thousands of displaced refugees who come over on small boats, which the Home Office are now looking to allocate evenly throughout Britain, which further exasperates our position.
Thanks, Alan. And we've all seen the recent TV coverage about the Stradey Park Hotel, haven't we? So we know it's impacting lots of authorities. Councillor Barry.
Yeah, just a quick one, Chair. A clarification really on page 24, where we talk about the schemes to be completed. The Persimmon site in Tyne says there are 5 of 12 units. So is it only 5 that have homelessness or social housing, or is it 12 that are going to be allocated to social housing? I'm not quite clear where we are with that.
Yeah, there's 12 social houses, so it's 10% based on the Section 106 affordable. So let me just check. Sorry, my colleague. I think it's just looking at the date. So there'd be 5 in July 24. So for on the site, the social housing and the market homes would be pepper potted essentially to do a blend and sustainable community. So 5 in 24, and then the remaining 7 would be later on during the.
Lovely. Thanks, Susan. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thank you. I think we've covered this well. I mean, I echo Councillor Salmon's comments at the beginning about this is an unrenewable area of work, and it feels sometimes relentless. And the work that's being done should be congratulated. It's a never-ending process, particularly as Alan just referred to, the sort of tying it into all of the refugee and migrant crises as well. It doesn't stop, does it? So thanks. So Councillor Salmon has suggested we get some regular updates on this, and I fully appreciate that. What I don't want to do is tread on the toes of any other scrutiny committee, however. So if that is better going somewhere else, then I'm happy to take that offline. But as it stands, I think we'll recommend it comes here, unless a better home is identified down the line. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. That's a really good conversation. I'm guessing, ladies and gents, you're not going to stay. Excellent. More than happy to leave. I know it's a gripping area of work, the Governance Audit Committee, but feel free to leave. Thank you. Leave the door open. We'll now move on to the quarterly update on corporate risks. Item 8 and item 9 can overlap a little bit, but we'll take item 8 first. Turn to Councillor Barry first.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Q4 review where Governance and Audit Committee can input into the risk register and have your say into perceived risks reviewed by Cabinet and Corporate Management team and the subsequent increase or decrease in risk scores highlighted for debate. I thought, Chair, we'd again start by looking at the risks as laid out in Appendix 1 and associated scores, the likelihood times the impact times the likelihood. At the end of Q4, so May 2023 compared to January 2023. So finance 1 and 2, finance 1 being the balancing of the budget, finance 2 the overall financial sustainability, cyber attacks, school attainment, capacity, capacity 2, capacity 1 being having the skills and capacity for service delivery, capacity 2 difficulties in recruiting and SPODs, governance, safeguarding, performance, homelessness, as we've just discussed, climate change and net zero, waste management targets, WICIS, the inability of the system leading to inaccurate record keeping, town centre safety, sustainable community schools, home to school transport. At the end of Q3, there were 4 risk increases. Both capacities increased. Performance and homelessness. Capacity 1 and 2 issues are long-standing and are somewhat endemic, with the issues of being the smallest authority in Wales. As a consequence, performance is inevitably an issue. Hence, all 3 had interlinked. Risks were increased at Q3 and have remained at that level. Homelessness reached a score of 25 in that quarter. At the close of Q3, and the pressures on statutory housing obligations, as we've just discussed, will remain at that level until some of the mitigation we've heard starts to pay dividends. At the end of Q4, there have been 2 reductions and 2 increases. Finance 1, the balancing of the budget, WICIS, finance going from 20 to 15, WICIS 16 to 12, and 2 increases, waste management from 16 to 20, home to school transport to 20. The decrease in finance 1 from 20 to 15, the balance of the budget, is related to strong governance of our finances. That would include budget board, monthly, quarterly monitoring of both revenue and capital programs, and we're now the addition of quarterly reserve budget monitoring reports that we've introduced from 2023-24 onward. The authority has now returned 5 consecutive surpluses, Steve. So, we're in good order, and that's why the score has dropped. WICIS 16 to 12, the instability of the system leading to inaccurate record keeping. The reduction is due to the improved stability of the system. Problems in recent months have been escalated to system managers to investigate and rectify. This is an all Wales system that, as an authority, we have little control over, but it has improved. Increases. There are 2 increases, however, in waste management targets, 16 to 20. This relates to the increase in the percentage of waste we will need to be recycled to meet our recycling targets before we incur financial penalties. Mitigation is already in hand to avoid this happening, and speaks to the effectiveness, I think, of the governance of the risk register. Home to school transport, along with ALN transport, has gone from 16 to 20 down to the A465 redevelopment and ongoing works predominantly. Chair outlined through the following report to this, as you say, they're very closely related, is the opportunity for committee to give a strategic view on risk management by using this very practical report we have here to enhance risk management as a key feature of governance within the authority. For example, your view on the introduction of the new developments to each risk incorporated into the strategy policy at full council on the 7th of September last year, and whether the committee find it useful. A summary of each risk is included. The owner of the risk, as you identified on the action log item 4 earlier on, needs to be logged. The risk score, the trend in which direction the risk is going, and progress on the risk on each of the mitigating actions. We have Matthew Rivers with us today to take any technical questions on the report and cover any mitigating actions in relation to any of the risks, Chair.
Excellent, thank you for that. That's a really helpful summary of the looking back at Q4. Just in terms of technical processes, understanding the order of things, section says what's next. It says 7.1 cabinet approval of the report. Does that happen before or after this meeting? Has this report been approved by cabinet, or is it going to cabinet after us? Just to understand.
Always after.
Okay, so it goes from here to cabinet.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
that's really
Chair.
Thank you, Matt. That's really helpful to understand. And the other question is around understanding how risks get onto the risk register. Frankly, there's obviously a hierarchy of risk registers within each department directorate, but I wonder whether do do we have formal kind of horizon scanning workshops, groups who kind of look at what's out there? You know, even looking at things that have gone wrong elsewhere, things that new legislation and the consequence of that relating to an earlier agenda item. Just how do we sort of spot what might be coming down the tracks?
I meet with the operational heads of service. So each head of service will have an operational risk register in relation to our risk appetite, which was in the risk strategy policy. I believe it's 12. So anything over 12, I log and I take to corporate management team for escalation. If they deem it necessary to put on the corporate log, then it will, as the ALN one has now, and the schools one. That came from education operational risk registers, deemed severe enough to put on the corporate risk register. So anything they said over and above 12, when I speak with the operational risk managers, will be escalated to the corporate management team. When I speak with corporate management team, if they deem anything from their point of view on the horizon, like the waste management target, climate change and decarbonisation, then they will be deemed severe enough and added. They'll go on the corporate report for Governance and Audit Committee to have discussion over, and then to Cabinet for approval. And then at that point, they will be added. Yeah, that's the process that we go through.
That's really helpful, Matt. And just to follow up on one thing you just talked about, it's referred to explicitly in the next item, but since you've just mentioned it, the risk appetite is set at 12. Is that a standard risk appetite for all areas of the organisation, or are there variations to that? I see you shaking your head.
No, that's 12 as indicated in the strategy policy, which was approved. So that's 12 across the corporate. So anything regardless above 12, I will log from the operational risk side or the corporate management side, and then they will go forward to discussion with corporate management team and cabinet and governance and audit. So it's 12 across the patch. There's no departmental differences at all.
Okay, that's helpful to understand, and be interested to know how regularly that's updated, etc. But that's not for this question. The other part of what you said is it then goes to the I think you said senior management team, who then decide whether it goes onto the corporate risk register or not. So that means there's a kind of moderation exercise. So there might be things that are 12s which don't make it onto this list.
Yes.
Which means that somebody in one corner of the organization thinks this is really important, but the organization collectively doesn't think it's a top 12, top 20 issue. Is that correct?
We have a discussion in regards to it, and so there may be an area where capacity is 12 in one of the areas, but then what we look to do is mitigate that out. So we'll keep the capacity as a capacity overall in the corporate risk register, rather than having sort of maybe 10 or 15 capacity risks. But we section that out and we go back to the operational managers then with any mitigation that we're going to do from a corporate point of view, whether it be helpful to them and they log it on their side as well. Otherwise, we could be having multiple capacity risks. But the one thing that I'm looking to do going forward is, once we review the operational risk registers, is have that matrix attached to the corporate one. So wherever there's a capacity risk within waste management, highways, planning, environmental health, wherever it may be, that will come into the capacity risks just to strengthen and solidify and crystallize where those capacity risks are from an operational basis.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Matt. Andrew, do you want to come back in?
Only from the perspective of we've given risk. I think we met as a cabinet CMT probably 3 years ago now, and it was only dedicated as an item on the agenda, and we've probably spent the whole of the meeting talking about risk, and since then it's really taken prevalence. I think we need to develop it further now, as Matthew has identified there. There's a way to go, but the key for us is ensuring that for it to remain a central pillar of governance for us, is we need everybody to buy into it. It needs to be throughout the organisation. I think we've still got work to do, but we're getting there. I think where we are today is far in advance of where we were even 3 years ago. And it's developing. I mean, you'll see with the next report, I talk about some of the risks falling away, and new risks coming on. I think we took on 6 new risks in the last 12 months, I think, Matt. So it is a dynamic sort of pillar of governance for us, but we still need to develop it further, I think, because that effective horizon scanning puts us in a good place in terms of, you know, where we're likely to be as an organisation, and is a key element to get right, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and I agree entirely. It's about, and everyone's got the opportunity to spot issues and problems before they emerge. So there needs to be a bottom up as well as a top down approach to it. It's like the sort of, you know, the NASA Space Challenger will fall over because of one individual thing. Somebody spotted it but didn't feel able to report it. Hopefully everyone's going to be able to report risks and spot them, and we collectively grow. Okay, I think that's the looking back piece. I think we can now turn to agenda item 9, which is in a similar vein. This is the annual risk management progress report, some of which we've already talked about, and the risk register for this year. Again, we're with you, Andrew.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Chair. So where the last report was a very practical demonstration of the governance of risk management, this report is more strategic in its content. The report is Appendix 1, page 43 of the papers, speaks to the authority's commitment to focus and mitigate the most significant corporate risks that can impact on the council and our communities. We focus over the past 12 months and discuss the risks introduced over the last year, namely climate change, net zero came in, waste management targets, WICIS, as I mentioned earlier, town centre safety, community focused schools, and home to school transport. And those risks that have fallen away were namely coronavirus and the EU transition, Brexit. Members are required to oversee and understand and consider the risk of the benefits of mitigation and the requirements of an all-encompassing approach to risk. Take part in the overall responsibility and governance in the delivery of the service. There are technical explanations of the mechanisms of the risk register and its implications. What we ask of committee today is you receive to review the annual report and what is considered our current risk register, and to discuss your continued support for the risk management of one of the central pillars of good governance by inviting corporate leadership team to scrutinise any mitigating measure to perceive risks into the future. So if you can call anybody in, because I think it's in everybody's interest, Chair, for you to keep ahead of what we're doing about the risks, and probably the more important part of it, identifying the risk is one issue. The mitigation to those risks and actions taken are vitally important, and where the committee has a great role to play. So along with the previous report, Chair, if that's sufficient, I'll leave it for the committee to discuss.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really important. I'm pleased to see you mention that some risks have been added and some risks disappear. Some risks, however, are going to be sticky. I think they call them wicked problems, things that aren't going to be fixed overnight. And homelessness sounds like one of those. Absolutely. Just to a bit of homework and just really tidying up. I wasn't sure. This report item 9 is the risk register for 23-24. The heading at 5.0, I think, therefore, is just a carryover from last year when it says 22-23. That should say 23-24. Okay, Matt's nodding. I think there's a couple of other places where the wrong year is referencing. Neither here nor there. Okay.
Apologies for that, Chair. I mean, I spoke with Matthew earlier on today. There are a couple of issues within the report, but we're in this transition period from Andrew Mogford to obviously Matthew, and there's been some disruption within that transition. So there are things that we've identified between myself and Matthew, and those will be rectified. Matthew.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, and we spoke picked that up earlier, Chair, and they'll be rectified following this meeting, ready for if you approve to go to Cabinet for approval at the next Cabinet in July and make those changes.
Yeah, fully supportive of the ambition here to raise the profile of risk management in the organisation. You know, things you can do is around obviously the training, the workshops, etc. And you know, going back to the action log of this meeting.
Yep.
There's clearly some issues there about making sure we get that program of work back up and running. Certainly making sure that, you know, everyone understands the answer to the question, who's the risk manager in this organization? The answer is everyone is. And then until we get that message across the organization, that will really help. I think there's probably something to do around risk appetite. I'm not sure the one size fits all is particularly helpful, because I think if I turn to Steve and says there's a moderate chance of losing money along the way, I think he'd be mortified. And I think we turned to HR about terms and conditions of the staff, when we said there's a moderate risk of us not paying our staff, they'd be mortified as well. So I think there's probably room for a variable scale of risk appetite, if truth be told. And again, there's lots of models out there about how that's done. But the important thing is that we have the conversations about risk and we understand what risk is. To move it forward, I'd suggest it probably needs to tie into all the strategic plans of the organizations, because after all, a risk is nothing more than something stopping you doing what you're trying to do. So if we're trying to do climate change and net zero, here's the risk of us failing to do it. So if we're trying to do waste management targets, and here's the risk of us failing to do it. So some of them tie directly, some of them less so, but nevertheless, I think that's really important, because if it doesn't tie into something we're trying to do, why is it a risk to us? Is a simple question, isn't it? So really happy with the paper itself. One last thing that really caught my eye, I thought, wow, we're taking this stuff seriously, was page 58 of the bundle, page 16 of the report. At the very bottom, it says, to such a point, the risk management e-learning module, and there's a sentence that says, ICT accounts are disabled at the end of the financial year for those staff and councillors who do not complete all of the e-learning modules during the year. Yikes. Has anyone been pinged for that? And if are you at liberty to tell us numbers and how? Says that sounds like a big stick. Is it a stick that's actually waved?
I don't know numbers, Chair, but I know there have been a couple that have been very close to having their log-ons taken away, shall we say?
Excellent. Okay, that shows it's
ICT take it very seriously.
Good, and so they should. Excellent. I'm just thinking to myself, well,
Remember sinking into the chair.
have I done any training here? It's like, okay, we'll all go away and reflect on this, won't we, ourselves? Excellent. Okay. Any other questions for anybody on this? I think it's a excellent piece of work, you know, and this is a continuation. It carries on. You know, we as Andrew said, I think we need to continue to build it into the fabric of the organization a bit more and make it part of mainstream everyday conversations. When you hear two people talking in the corridor about what's the risk of doing this, then you know you've kind of cracked it. So yeah, absolutely. Wonderful, mate. Do you want to come back in, finish?
No, Matthew's done a sterling job on this. I think for me, I think we need to sit down and revisit risk now, sort of, as I would see it, 3 years into where we sort of catapulted into the limelight. I think there's a call for us to make the system perhaps a little bit more real time. We tend to be sort of retrospective in looking at risks, you know, in terms of the reports, and I'd like to see something that's a little bit more live in terms of we can action it a little bit quicker. And I think that the owner of the risk needs to be held to account for the urgency. So there's a few things that we need to look at in terms of developing it, but I think we're on the right track. And I think, you know, if we could sit down again, we need to sit down again, Matt, with corporate leadership and with cabinet to see how that can improve and on what sort of timescale we can do that on a very practical basis. But,
Agreed.
Thank you, Chair.
Excellent, and that just leads me on to one last question. I said a little last question, but you just triggered something in my mind. What software, if anything, do we use to track risks in the organization? Is it just an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document or something more fancy?
There's nothing more fancy than an Excel document, Chair. It's a rather large, cumbersome Excel spreadsheet, which is hard to navigate around. When I sit with the WLGA at the Risk Managers Network and listen to the other 21 authorities having the systems in place that will provide interlinks with different risks. So if you, like I say, if we look at a finance risk, that'll ping up capacity, because if you've got finance in regards to capacities and performance. So there's an interconnectivity between each of those risks there. On the systems, you'll have real-time data for decision making, for council reports, cabinet reports, etc. But for us, it's a very colourful, very large, cumbersome Excel spreadsheet.
Which in itself has difficulties in terms of engaging officers to provide you with updates, etc. So okay, I hear your pain. I've been there and done that. Okay, I'm sure if you talk nicely to somebody in finance, they might find Well, perhaps some money. Who knows?
Is Steve nodding at you there, Chair? Is he nodding?
He's poker face, poker face. Okay, with that, let's move on to discussions of finances and others. Let's move on to item 10. And Mike and Ian, you've been very patient. We've got item 10, first of all, is the quarterly update on all things audit up to the end of March. So my usual request is talk us through this, but also tell us if anything's changed since then until now.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Yeah, as you say, this is the work programme update for Q4 of 22-23. It covers the position for our financial audit work, our local performance audit work, local government studies, and the work of Eston and CIW. So it's essentially an item for information. But I could give you a quick update on the areas of work that I'm cited of. Also happy to take any questions after that, but I may have to take some of those away depending on the nature of the question and which audit team it relates to. So in terms of the local performance audit work updates since the end of March, the unscheduled care project is progressing. We are hoping to get draft reports out by the end of July on that one. We're also starting drafting a report shortly for the performance information thematic. With regards to the digital thematic, the field work is underway and we're just currently lining up interviews for that. We're still planning on delivering the capital programme management. We're looking at doing this over the summer, perhaps into the autumn, but we haven't yet timetabled in fieldwork for specific councils as yet. And the setting of wellbeing objectives project at Merthyr, we actually had the workshop this morning. The fieldwork's finished for that, so we're moving to drafting the report on that one. So just a quick overview of the local government, the local performance audit work, but happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I'm guessing, Mike, I can bring you in as well, because one bit which added no value at all, it has to be said, is when it talks about audit of council's 22-23 accounts, it says timetable March, November, and status in progress. It couldn't be less helpful if it was blank, frankly. I mean, could tell us where we are, how we go in, on target, all those kind of questions.
Thanks, Chair. Before I start, I'll get to that question. I'll get back to that question now. Just apologies from my colleague Alison Butler was meant to be in there in person today. I think she'd arranged to do that, and over the weekend had a cycling accident, has managed to break her elbow. So she's in considerable pain and not in work. So you'll have to put up with me. In answer to the question, there isn't much detail there. I accept that, but frankly, we haven't made much progress. So we're saying we're starting in March. We haven't really started. We've still got the ambition to sign off by the end of November. So that's still the plan. If I'm honest, local government audit in the UK is having a really tough time. So it is possible we won't make that deadline, but we're planning on that and trying to take as many actions as we can to do that. I don't know if you've seen, we could spend quite a long time talking about this, but I don't know if you've seen what's happening in England in terms of not potentially signing off accounts, just writing them off, basically. So that there is a real issue within local government accounts, which we're aware of, and we all know that it's not satisfactory, frankly. So we're working hard to rectify that. But I guess getting back to the central question is, we haven't really started in March, short of attending some of these meetings and starting to accumulate some knowledge, and haven't got a plan at the moment for that delivery in November, but that should be available in the next few weeks. So we're getting a bit clearer towards the end of our health audits, etc., when staff will be available. So Steve will be having we'll start to have those conversations with the finance team to see when they're available and when we can do that. So hopefully by the next time this committee meets, there'll be a bit more flesh on the bones in terms of that rather bland and I accept unhelpful information in the update. So I hope that, probably not what you want to hear, but probably gives a bit more detail than this in the plan.
No, it's a realistic assessment of where we are. And again, it takes some comfort from the fact that we are in the bunch of all local authorities in Wales, and that's helpful. What I'd say, Mike, is if planning information is available in a format which would come to committee, then please, if you can send it in, we can make sure that it gets circulated out to committee members, because we as a committee don't sit until middle of September now. So that's quite a way away. So anything that emerges in the meantime, then please share.
In full transparency, as you know, we're having difficulties with the recruitment and retention of staff. Alison, who was the new audit manager, gave her intention of retiring last week. So it won't be Alison, it'll be someone else, and we'll update the committee as and when we know who that person is. So we're out for recruitment now. We've acted pretty quick because we have to. So in full transparency, there's another slight spanner in the works, but as we say, still aiming for end of November.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. That's really helpful to understand. Any questions for Ian and Mike? I look around the room and I don't see any hands. Okay, thanks, guys. We'll stay with you, I guess, Mike, which is the certification of grants, agenda item 11.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's a pretty high level summary, really. Basically saying we've audited 3 grants, 2 of which had an extended deadline. 3 of which had an extended deadline, and 2 of which we met. One, the housing benefit, we didn't, but it is now signed off. The information is there in terms of timeliness, but also, I guess, for assurance for the committee in terms of there are no significant issues arising from the certification of those claims that we feel we need to bring to your attention. So 2 were just clear, and 1 had a letter going to the DWP. That's not uncommon, and there's nothing significant which I bring to your attention. I have to say I'm not on top of the detail of that in terms of what the letter was pertaining, but having signed off a couple of others elsewhere, that basically we are required, anything we find at all, to write a letter to the DWP. That's part of the certification instructions. It's not something we would particularly go with in terms of really minor findings, but there's nothing that in terms of that report or update that we bring to the attention of the committee. So I guess there's that assurance that they're signed off and no actions for you to take.
Thanks. I might argue, given that all we found was £367, that these might be the audits you don't do rather than the financial accounts ones, but okay. Mike, just quickly, is there a particular reason why the deadline was missed for housing benefits? It was extended through the end of January and it came in the middle of March.
It's the same, almost referring you to the same answers before, really. It's all down to, we are struggling to catch up. We can have a conversation around why we're in that position. It's quite a long conversation, but happy to have it, actually, but it might not be the detail for the committee. So it's the same thing, really. We've been struggling, and you're not alone in those dates being signed off. I think I'm right in saying some haven't been signed off at all yet. So you're not alone in those dates being missed.
But there's no consequence of late submission for this. There's no clawback. There's nothing like that. It's
DWP haven't indicated so, as far as I'm aware. And again, probably referring to England, I think we're in a better place than them. So okay. And they're not trying to claw that back. So I don't think there's any financial impact for the authority as far as we've been made aware.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Questions, Mike? Okay, thank you. We note the report. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 12, which is the internal audit strategy and plan. I'm lucky to have 3 auditors to my left, but I will turn to Lisa, I think, to introduce this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So agenda item number 12 is the internal audit strategy and risk-based plan for 2023-24. So in line with the public sector internal audit standards, internal audit must establish a risk-based plan to determine the priorities of internal audit activity, and these should be consistent with the organisation's goals. So to develop our risk-based plan, the head of internal audit consults with senior management to develop an understanding of the organisation's strategies, key business objectives, and the risk management process. So in order to produce the internal audit plan, the work starts a long time before the end of the financial year. So we look at things like the strategic risk register, we look at the corporate plan, we look at key financial systems, any grant claims that require certification, we look at any follow-up reviews where we've had a previous audit report of a limited or no assurance opinion. We issue questionnaires to all service departments and ask managers to fill in key information about changes to staffing, to processes. We look at any audit reviews that we've carried forward from the previous audit plan, and we have discussions with the senior leadership team, including the Chief Executive, Section 151 officer, and various other senior officers. So Section 3.7 of the report details that changes to the way the council's operating since COVID, including any new risks as a result of remote or hybrid working, have been considered and included where appropriate in the plan. 4.1 of the report shows that Appendix A is our draft internal audit strategy document. So this demonstrates how the internal audit service will be developed and delivered in accordance with our terms of reference. And this is a document which we update and review annually and present to committee. So 4.2 of the report refers to Appendix B, which is our annual draft plan for the year. So this has been formulated in accordance with the standards. Members will also note that we've given the outline scopes for each audit assignment, and we've also made reference to any carry forward audits from last year or any follow-up reviews. It's also important to mention that many council staff continue to work remotely or on a hybrid approach. So as an audit team, we will continue to do the same. We'll work remotely, but use a hybrid approach of some in-person visits and meetings required for each audit. So this will be discussed on an audit by audit basis. So as and when we're picking up individual assignments, the auditors will have that discussion of the best possible approach to undertake that audit review. I think it's important to mention that whilst this is our plan for the year, we need to be flexible to allow for changing circumstances and events that may occur, or any requests from management to respond to new issues that may arise. And this is our proposed plan for the year, and this will give us sufficient coverage to be able to give an opinion at the end of 23-24 and throughout the year, as we've done previously. Members of the committee will have updates on progress against the plan and any changes to the plan that may be required as we carry through the year. I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions that members have on either the strategy or the plan.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And I think the one thing to note is stuff happens is the technical term, isn't it? So you can agree a audit plan today and something will come from left field and the audit plan will be something completely different or certainly changed in some way. So happy to see it as a collected plan today. It's a point in time. First quite obvious question for me is last year, and we'll get on to the audit annual report next, but there were some items which were postponed from last year into this year, and yet we've got 41 audits in here for this year, which is a lot. So the questions about capacity, the questions about have you got enough room in terms of days, etc., to get 41 plans delivered to a sufficient sort of detail, etc., complexity. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Well, our audit plan is based on the number of days according to the business plan. So it's the number of days that Merthyr Council have purchased from the shared service. So this is our days that we reconcile our audit figures to. You're correct in saying we carried forward some audits from last year into this year. Variety of reasons really. Sometimes we can take some of our audits can take a little bit longer than we originally thought. It could be throughout the year we're asked to undertake pieces of work that are unplanned. We may be asked to contribute to any investigations or to liaise with the fraud officer to do a joint piece of work. Also in respect of last year, we had some long-term sickness. One person off for the entire year, one person off for a large part of the year, which continued into quarter 1 of this year. But we did have an arrangement whereby we could purchase some extra internal audit days from an external provider, which we did. So we're hoping that some issues like that will have settled for this year. And also the beauty of the shared service is that we have a team of 25 auditors across the 4 councils. So we've got other auditors who might be able to pick up pieces of work for us if later in the year we're in a position where we think the plan isn't in the position that we intended it to be.
Okay, that's really helpful to understand them. I think probably the last one from me is you said you discussed with the senior management team in terms of the type of things to be in the plan, and therefore some things obviously didn't make the cut for whatever reason. You obviously had conversations with Audit Wales and any other regulators. You do a lot of school stuff, obviously, but so you work closely with Estin in terms of where you go, the things you do and the things you don't do, I guess.
Not necessarily, Chair. We will liaise with Audit Wales to make sure there's no duplication with the external audit. But we've got a set programme for most of what we do. It's developed over the years from SIPFA and best practice matrices of what the key controls are in each particular area which we're due to audit. We've got an eye on what happens in Estin, but we don't really speak to them on a regular basis because their remit is different from us. Yeah. We're providing assurance on the adequacy of the internal control, the governance, the risk management, etc. They come from more from an educational point of view. But interestingly, Estin do ask for our internal reports when they do a inspection of a particular school. So we do provide that information to them, and we're happy to work with partners, but ultimately we've got to provide assurance in terms of the overall control environment to you as a governance and audit committee and to the chief officers of Merthyr.
Thank you, Andy. That's very helpful to understand. Yeah, so I noted there's all the follow-up reviews of all the limited and no assurance reports that were done this year. So that's helpful to see all of those in there, and I'll carry forwards as they were marked in the comments column. Just thinking widely, the hot button topics for almost every public sector organisation in this year, just as last year, and I suspect in the coming years, is going to be something around climate change and net zero, something around cyber security and ICT, and something around equality, diversity, inclusion. I see the first 2 of those in there quite clearly, items 2, 3, and 6 listed down there. There's nothing specifically covering the EDI piece, and I don't think I saw it in the risk register either. Is that a topic you've had conversations with, and I'm therefore assuming it's not, if it didn't make the top 40, it's not a significant issue. We're comfortable with where we are.
Thanks, Chair. We're going back to the process from earlier on. When we look at setting the plan for the year, we start off with looking at the risk registers. We have those engagement conversations with various departments. We look at what the key risks are for the council in failing to meet its corporate objectives. We have those discussions with key management, and we've got a number of days which we start off with an audit universe, which then we have to from that audit universe balance with risk and the number of days that we've got in the plan. So it's all on the basis of what we can achieve with the auditors and the resource that we've got in the days that we've got. And if something doesn't come on our radar as being an essential piece of work for 1 year, it's not to say it might not be on our radar for next year, but for this year it wasn't something that was part of the plan.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Any other questions for our audit colleagues? I think we're formally asked to approve the audit plan, so are we all happy to do so? Do a quick show of hands. I see nods and waves, and yes, excellent, thank you. We'll therefore move on to agenda item 13, which is the retrospective one. This is the annual internal audit report for 22-23, and I think Andy, you're going to take this.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is a key report which we bring to Governance and Audit Committee. The plan is looking forward in terms of 23-24, and the annual report is looking back 22-23. So it's important that they are generally brought to Governance and Audit Committee at the same time, and they are key documents in terms of providing assurance to you as a Governance and Audit Committee throughout the year. So as part of the public sector internal audit standards, I have to provide an annual report based on the work that we've achieved during 22-23, which funnels into me being able to provide an overall opinion on the level of assurance across the organisation in terms of internal control, governance and risk management processes in place. So this is that report. It also gives you some assurance that we've achieved what we set out to achieve at the beginning of the year in terms of the previous year's plan. So, Chair, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but if I could just talk through some of the key headings from the report itself, and then that'll feed into the overall opinion for 22-23. So in terms of an introduction, there's a reason why we have to provide an internal audit annual report, which I've alluded to already. Public sector internal standards specify that we need to do it. And in terms of the work which we undertake, that is set out in the plan as this is described for 23-24, where individual audits are given an audit opinion based on the work that we've undertaken, identifying strengths and weaknesses, and that's set out in 2.2 with a definition. So we're identifying substantial, reasonable, limited or no assurance categories to individual audit assignments. Table 2 sets out our results for 22-23, the number of substantial opinions issued, number of reasonables, number of limited, and the one no assurance. Table 3, we identified that we will undertake 58 audit jobs within the year, 22-23. Not all were opinion related. Some things we have to do on an annual basis which don't lend themselves to an opinion, and that's resulted in the opinions noted above, the 30 opinions which we've identified. Mentioned that there were a number of limited reports during 22-23, and information has been provided to members during the year in terms of those detailed reports as directly to Governance and Audit Committee throughout the year. But just to give some summary of information of why we felt that those opinions were limited are set out in section 3, where we had some key concerns which need to be addressed. The action plan would be agreed by the service managers, and we would undertake a follow-up audit in 23-24 to make sure that what has been agreed has actually been implemented, and we will be providing assurances to you as a committee further into 23-24 when those follow-up audits have been completed. As part of our reports, we provide recommendations, and those are high, medium, and low priority. It's important to note that we've identified a number of recommendations in our report, which is the action plan, which I've mentioned previously. But the key to this is getting recommendations implemented, and that's reported to you throughout the year as well in terms of how we progress, both on terms of the audits which we've undertaken and the follow-up audits which were due to unfavourable audit opinions. Within the annex, it does show the number of recommendations that have been implemented, and I'll come to that as we go through the report. We also get involved with counter fraud work from time to time, where referrals come into the team, and we work very closely with the council's own fraud officer to make sure we undertake an investigation as appropriate at the appropriate time. I'm sure you've all heard of the National Fraud Initiative by now, and we coordinate that on behalf of Merthyr, and again work with the fraud officer to make sure that we provide the appropriate data, and then we do check on the data matches that come back through to us. In terms of key performance measures for the team, we do send out a client satisfaction questionnaire to conclusion of our audit. So when we finalise an audit report, They're sent out to the service managers, and our return rate is around 66%. There's always room for improvement there, and we'll work on that throughout the year. There's some comments there in terms of 6.3, comments from the service managers about how helpful the auditors were in terms of undertaking that particular work. We do get some favourable comments sometimes, and I'm happy to take those on board to make sure we're delivering an even better service moving forward. In order to develop and maintain a professional service, we need to make sure the staff are up to speed with their training, and we make sure that we provide as much training as we possibly can, both in-house, continued professional development, and within the region itself, we've taken on board 2 graduate auditors this year, and 22-23, who have now started professional qualifications, which again will help lead into a more delivery of a more professional team. For the team itself, performance indicators were set out in Table 5 on 8.1. We've completed 74% of the agreed plan for Merthyr in 22-23, which is a significant improvement on the previous year, and compares very favourably to the latest available information from the Welsh Chief Auditors Group. We talked about responses from our clients in terms of the satisfaction questionnaires already, and the recommendations that have been accepted is important as well. The number of days between draft and final reports is 27 days. That's where we send out the draft report to the service managers, and we wait until they respond and provide their comments on the action plan before we can actually issue a final. So that PI is out of our control, but we will be working with service managers and senior managers throughout the year to make sure we bring that down. So I mentioned at the beginning that we need to provide an annual report in terms of the public sector internal audit standards. That's quite a comprehensive document. It's not just the plan, the report, there are how we deliver our service in a professional way, how we make sure we evidence our reports, how we make sure we maintain standards, and the service is provided professionally with the code of ethics, how we undertake a definition of what internal audit is about, etc., to make sure we're up to the level of standards. There is an external assessment which is undertaken every 5 years, and that's in the process of being completed at the moment. I'm aware there's a draft version which will need to be sent out to the authority, and that will be reported into Governance and Audit Committee in due course. So taking all of that information on board, that enables me to arrive at an overall internal audit opinion, and that's set out in section 11, which is Appendix A, page 129 of your pack. An opinion has been given in terms of risk management, the governance arrangements, and the internal control, and they all are reasonable assurances for 22-23. And that then feeds into the overall opinion, which is the reasonable assurance based on the work that we've undertaken during the year. Annex 1 sets out a list of jobs which we've audited with the corresponding opinions and the number of recommendations made in each report. Annex 2 is a more detail where we are setting out what work has been completed compared to the plan and anything that needs to be carried forward, along with the opinion and the recommendations that have been made. So members might see that some work has been completed, some has been carried forward to 23-24, and some where there's a draft report issued awaiting finalisation. Annex 3 then goes into a bit more detail around the internal recommendations, the numbers made, and the number that have been implemented. As I say, that's reported to this committee on a regular basis throughout the year. And just Annex 4 is just some information about the annual questionnaire, the client satisfaction questionnaire, which we sent out when all reports are finalised. That's a quick run through, Chair, of our annual report for 22-23, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Andy. That's a really important document which feeds into the governance statement, which forms part of the annual account. So it is an important document. Just check it. It says draft across it. Of course, it's watermark, but it's not a draft. This is the report. We're not here to comment upon it, I guess. We're here to comment upon it, but it is the report.
Absolutely, yes, Chair. This is the report.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
and members are asked to give consideration to the annual report, please.
Okay, thank you. I guess I just set off by saying that it's the reasonable assurance is a good result. I mean, the categorization does show there is a group above it, but that's a rarely given out category. And I don't know whether you've got any stats across Welsh government, Welsh local authorities, Andy, but I suspect they're few and far between, and it's a very, very solid result. So I think the authority should be pleased with the outcome here. The only one thing I'd fly in the ointment, we've already talked about capacity and some of the reports that carried forward, but there was enough work done to be able to form an opinion, so that's excellent. You did mention that there is a section there which talks about 27 days it took between issuing the draft report and issuing the final report, and as you said, that's out of your control because you issue and then management take time to send back, I guess. So I'm presuming, I don't know, put words in your mouth, but there's obviously a piece of work to be done there to encourage people to respond in a more timely fashion.
Yes, Chair, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we would encourage service managers to get back to us as soon as possible. Ideally, within a 10-day turnaround is feasible, but we will be working with services managers throughout the year to encourage them to respond to us more promptly. It's in their best interests because then the sooner we can get those recommendations agreed, the sooner they can start implementing them.
Yeah, and the final thing for me is on section 3, which talks about those audit reports which have received limited assurance. I think we should probably hold those in our mind because 3 of those are in the back of the pack we'll consider under item 15. So we'll just keep those in our head we might need to refer back to pages 117 and 118 in the next few minutes. But thank you, Andy. It's a comprehensive piece of work. Thank you. Any questions, comments for Andy, or do we give it consideration? I think we've given it consideration.
Just make a comment, Richard.
Yeah, sure.
Just an observation, really, in terms of, I was looking at Annex 1 there and thinking, you know, there's a considerable amount of information there, which really gets under the skin of the operation of the authority. You know, just a quick word with Steve there, thinking, is this something that really needs to be brought to Cabinet and CMT to discuss the health of the organisation? Because it's a very good indicator, isn't it, in terms of the work that's been undertaken. I mean, we've got a broad range of substantial assurance right down to no assurance. And there's at the point of the annual report, I think that's a great point where we could be bringing that to Cabinet CMT to discuss the health of these various areas. And there may be some mileage in setting up a meeting or a session with Cabinet and CMT just to see where we go with it, because there's some really, I mean, I get all of the internal reports and I find them fascinating. And I think there's a case where, just in terms of completing that loop of investigation, information, feedback, and then putting it back into the system, I think there's a real tool here that we're not making best use of, because we don't bring it to the attention at this stage to Cabinet CMT.
I think that's a really, really sensible idea, and I'm just thinking if it isn't already included in the performance self-assessment reports that come back to us, which I think are half yearly, then it absolutely should do. But yeah, I think that's a really helpful suggestion, Andrew. Where we can take this.
We'll get Alex Stevens to action that. Put something together.
Okay, that's really helpful. Councillor Declan Salmon.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a quick question. It's in regards to the limited reports. Now, I'm not going to mention any of these by name, but some are a little bit shocking, to be honest. How long, in some, without being too specific, in some of the more shocking things that you've picked up, how long do you give them to, I know you've given a recommendation, but how long do you give them to make sure that they put something in place straight away?
Who's going to dive into that one? Lisa.
Thank you. When we issue our final reports and we receive the management comments back, depending on the priority of each recommendation, we've got a kind of template that we suggest. If it's a high priority, you should look to implement it within a shorter period of time. If it's a medium, within a, there's a kind of template for when a high, medium and low priority recommendation should be implemented. So when the management plan comes back with the implementation dates and the report is finalised, the auditor would look at those dates initially just to make sure that based on the severity of the finding and the recommendation that we are happy initially with the length of time that's been given to implement. So that's the first starting point, is that we make sure the dates that are given are reasonable based on the priority of the recommendation. Following this, we have got a follow-up process in place. So once that target date has passed, we will contact the service area and say, you said you were going to do this by this date. Has it been done? So we next look for those reassurances. But in terms of our follow-up audits, we need to look at all of the dates in the implementation plan from the report, because unless all of those dates have passed, we'd just be going out and looking at a work in progress and maybe repeating some of the same recommendations. So we initially give management sufficient time to put right the things that we have found, and only once that time has passed, and as long as it's a realistic time, then we would go back out.
Okay. Can I turn the mic off a sec?
Well, just sorry, and Andy, if you finish
Sorry,
that thought, I'll come back.
Sorry.
Just to add to what Lisa's said, in terms of the high priorities, in terms of the individual recommendation, realistically that should be immediate because it's a high priority, but at least within a month that should be addressed. When we come and do a follow-up, we would generally do a follow-up within 6 months of issuing a final audit report. So that hopefully gives you some timescales. But when we escalate this, so we send the final reports through to the senior managers, to SLT, to the directors, they can see the action plan. So there should be some weight behind our action plan to make sure that the service manager is implementing our recommendation, the agreed recommendation, as soon as practically possible. Sometimes a high priority risk recommendation can't be implemented immediately, because if you need a new member of staff to be able to do something, or you need a new system, but we are making sure that where it can be implemented, then there's a higher emphasis on getting the red recommendations implemented as soon as.
Okay, so I got to be specific then. Sometimes on certain schools where they haven't done DBS checks on staff, just people driving minibuses without insurance or a proper license or something like that. When you pick that up, you straight away go to the school and say, hang on, now you got to stop this now.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And in some cases, by the time we issue the draft report,
It's done.
Yeah, it's implemented. Okay. So on the action plan, definitely in the final report, you will see sometimes implemented already.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
I've been calling, but I think that's a very fair point. There's a number of recommendations in some of the reports which are just something slipped, and I agree that your characterization of some of these are, oh my God, how on earth did that happen? But as soon as it's been spotted, it's been fixed, and so I take assurance from the fact that they have responded readily to that. As soon as somebody said you shouldn't be doing that, they've stopped doing it, and I guess that's good. It's the next step is how do we make sure it doesn't happen again. But yeah, absolutely. Okay, Colin.
Yes, thanks. Well, I was just going to echo really Councillor Salmon's comments regarding that. There are some shocking findings there, but I noted that the recruitment for fraud officer, but I was also looking more generally, and hopefully, given the shape of your audit team, it's less of an issue for you, but it certainly is with some councils that when audit reveals extremely poor practice in these cases, and this sometimes may dip into criminality, that the auditors are not always qualified to manage that journey through effectively, and that good evidence gathering practices then can be, opportunities can be missed. But I would assume with the recruitment of the fraud officer, which I found reassuring towards the end of the report.
Well, Andy, you recommend?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a fair point. The fraud officer works specifically for Merthyr, but we engage with her and we work with her a lot as part of the regional internal audit service. And she's becoming professionally qualified, which is reassuring. We have a fraud officer in the Vale of Glamorgan as well, so they almost teamed up, sitting on the fringes of the regional internal audit service. So they come under our remit. Sorry, one in Vale comes under my remit. The one in Merthyr is a Merthyr employee, comes under Steve's remit. But we work very closely together to make sure we on top of things in terms of fraud. And when we do get any allegations coming in, then we will work very closely with the police if it's appropriate, to make sure that we do a proper investigation. Sometimes, and it depends on which police officer you speak to, they want an internal audit to actually investigate and hand over the pack. And sometimes the police will want to take over their investigation themselves. So it does depend, but we will have that conversation. Did you want to add anything, Lee?
Sorry, I was just going to say that if we're out on site and we are undertaking audits, if we do find something untoward, we will address it at the time of the audit, if we identify anything. So we wouldn't leave the site and then report on the incident or something we found. We would explain it at the time to give them sort of a chance to explain yeah.
Excellent. Okay, that's really helpful. Oh, Lisa, go on, final word.
I was just going to add then that the audit team is a very experienced audit team. Many of the senior auditors have been in post for 20 plus years, and although they don't have perhaps a formal fraud qualification as the fraud officer is working towards, they've got a detailed and sound knowledge of procedures and how to follow certain practices, how to escalate things, if information needs to be removed from site. So we have got a process in place, even though the staff are not fraud officers, they're auditors.
Excellent, thank you. Again, as I said, this is a really good report and a strong report, and it'll now go on to be part of, at least quoted in copiously through the governance statement now. Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time. It's 10 to 4. We'll hopefully won't be too long around now. Agenda item 14 is the forward work program for 23-24. So members will note, if nothing else, the dates of the future meetings which have been agreed at AGM. So they're all in there through till April 24. And if you want to check the AGM papers, they're there till May 25 as well. So hopefully we'll all be around then. Any issues, any questions about the program of work as it currently stands? Only one springs up for me, which is, Andy, you referred to the 5-yearly quinquennial audit review, and you said you'd bring that back. I don't know if that's going to be a separate piece of work, but if it is, it needs to be logged on here somewhere, and I presume by September we'll probably have that. Okay, so we'll add that into the September work program. Nothing else? Anybody else? Okay, excellent. We will then move on to the last item today, last substantial item today, which is item 15, which is the internal audit reports have been issued since the last governance and audit committee meeting. There's quite a number. They've been circulated to the members previously. I think there were 7, and 3 of the limited assurance reports that I've already mentioned in the report are amongst those 3. So Lisa, Helen, who's going to take us through this? Helen.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 15 is the internal audit information reports. The purpose of this report is to inform members of this committee of the issued finalised internal audit reports for the period 13th of April to the 26th of May 2023. Copies of these reports have been provided to members, and if members wish to review or consider these reports in more detail at a future meeting, they can. So table 1 shows that 9 internal audit reports were finalised since the last Governance and Audit Committee. The table also shows for each of the reports the audit opinion, the number of recommendations made, and whether these are high, medium, or low priority. As mentioned earlier, the 3 reports where there have been limited assurance, these have been discussed within the body of the annual report as per agenda item number 13. In advance of this meeting, the reports were sent to all Governance and Audit Committee members. I'm happy to take any questions.
So you've corrected me there, Helen. There were 9 reports. 6 of them had a reasonable assurance rating and 3 had a limited assurance rating. And Andy's annual report makes some reference to the highlights from those 3 in his paper. So if you want to flick back to page 117 of the bundle, that's where they get referenced. The 3 limited assurance reports are the Penydre school report, which draws out issues on safeguarding use of private fund and purchasing. And I suspect those issues are reasonably common across schools. They're the kind of things that they get tripped up on. The school minibus report is concerning in terms of vehicles being uninsured or people who aren't insured to drive the vehicles or unaware they were unaware that they weren't insured to drive the vehicle. The reports indicate that those issues have been addressed as we speak. And the last one of those 3 limited assurance reports was sundry debtors, which I think was probably a little bit of a concern because I know this area hasn't had limited assurance reports in the past, and it's about debts not being raised properly and not being chased up as appropriately. So hopefully those issues have been addressed. And I guess the kind of standard question from me is, if we aren't chasing our debts, is there a risk that the authority is not collecting all the money that is due to it? And I guess I turn to our esteemed Director of Finance for the answer to that.
Yes, it's the case that obviously we are collecting our debt and we do trace up our debt. We will have regular sundry debt reports or write-off reports which come to Cabinet. But obviously there just have been some issues raised as part of the audit, and that's something that we will follow up. But on the actual collection of debt, I am quite comfortable with just where we are with that, but there are a number of processes which we do need to follow up, and they do need to be more robust in going forward.
Thanks. That is reassuring. It seemed as though the report, without getting into too much detail, talked about sort of any debt recovery process being paused while queries were being raised, and effectively they weren't being unpaused. Is that a fair kind of descriptor of where we were and how those issues have been fixed now?
Yes, I think it's the case that we are having a review, obviously, as part of the responses to the report. We have had a number of new staff coming through the organisation. We've had a number of vacant posts as well for a while. I know that isn't an excuse, and I don't want it to be an excuse, but it is something that's, such something obviously that we are going to be responding to and ensuring in going forward that those will be put right.
Thank you, Steve. Mike, I can see your online hand is on. Is that Mike? Come on.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just thought I'd just come in, and that's probably an example of where internal audit and external audit, I was going to use the term work together, but where the work overlaps. So, for example, as we said earlier, the planning hasn't started yet, but when it does start, that is one of the things we'll take into account in terms of any risk of material misstatement. We would need to look at that and say, well, actually, if we do think there's a risk of material misstatement as a result of that, then we may do additional testing in that area. So it's just for committee members. It's probably a good example of how it would work together.
Thanks, Mike. That's really helpful to understand.
Thanks, Chair. And just to add that, to give you some reassurance as members, I guess, is that where we have limited assurance, and we've talked about this already, we will go back out and we will do a follow-up audit to make sure that the recommendations that have been agreed have actually been implemented. And that's sometimes done before we do the follow-up, like Lisa mentioned, in terms of the dates of implementation are in the action plan. So the team are on board with that. They're on top of it. They go through that on a pretty regular basis those dates are diarised and they're checked quite religiously. But then if we come back to you after we've done the follow-up report and with another unfavourable opinion, then Chair, you have the opportunity then to call in the service managers to challenge them as to why no improvements has been made.
Indeed, thank you, and I think we've done that in the past. Thank you. Andrew Bowie's the last word.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this speaks to the real value of internal audit to me. I mean, what it's done is highlighted an area that we verbally ask for assurance on every time I bring these sundry debt reports. We're told that, yeah, we've done everything we can, and I don't doubt we have. What I'm assured by everybody I've spoken to, because I brought up in budget board when I had the report, was that no, you know, it isn't as serious as it sounds. But it does sound very serious to us when you link a value of £5 million to a limited assurance opinion. Then of course we are very concerned. I'd be interested to see how this turns out. I welcome a follow-up report, but it's highlighted an area that there's always great concern over. We never like to write debt off.
Yeah.
If there's an issue that sits below, then we need to know about it. So thank you for the report in the first instance, and I welcome the second report. But I am assured by Steve's response and Ellis's response in that it isn't as serious as it sounds. I hope that is the case. But it's nice to know that it's been highlighted, and thank you for the report again.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone. Any other questions for Lisa and the team? Okay, thank you. That's the last paper today. Item 16 says reflection and evaluation. Two thoughts from me before I ask anybody else to interviews. One is you can't help but note there's only 4 of us here out of 12, and that's not very good, is it? So when at Democratic Services, you can nudge people ahead of next governance audit to ask people to come. I was aware of a couple of apologies before today, but the rest have been sort of okay, perhaps I need to ring them or something. Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah. Perhaps I can. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
There may be a role for the leaders of the various parties to have a word about the importance of this meeting. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is a vitally important thing that we need good attendance from and representation from those groups. So perhaps representation to both Geraint and Darren to see where we go.
I might chat to you about that. Yeah. Okay. Thank. That's really helpful. And the other thing I can't help but note is, oh my gosh, it's hot in here, and it's only June. So okay, clearly climate change is kicking in, particularly in Merthyr. So thanks everyone for your forbearance at a 2-hour meeting in this stifling heat. I don't. Anyone else got any other issues to raise? No. Good. Any other business? There is no other business. That concludes the meeting.